I'll spite.
When you first start learning English, everything feels a bit like a math problem.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You learn a grammar rule, you memorize a vocabulary word, and you just plug it into a sentence.
Right. It's very binary at that stage. It's either correct or incorrect.
Exactly.
And honestly, it's very comforting. You have a textbook, you have your flashcards, and there's a clear right answer for everything.
It is comforting.
Yeah.
But then, you hit this plateau,
Mm-hmm.
you reach an advanced level, maybe B2 or C1, and suddenly the math just stops working.
Yeah, the rules change.
Right. You understand every single word someone is saying, your grammar is perfect, but you still feel like you're completely missing the point.
Yes, the jokes fall flat.
Yeah.
Or you send an email that you think is perfectly polite and the other person seems offended.
Exactly. Because learning advanced English isn't really about memorizing more vocabulary anymore. It's about understanding what people mean versus what they actually say.
That is the big hurdle.
So today, our mission is to decode those hidden, unwritten rules of British and American communication.
Which is such a fascinating topic. Because the root of all this confusion, it actually comes down to a fundamental concept in anthropology.
Okay, anthropology. Where do we start?
Well, there's a theory originally developed by Edward T. Hall, and it explores the difference between high context and low context cultures.
High context and low context.
Right. And once you understand this framework, almost every single misunderstanding between American and British English speakers suddenly makes total sense.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I think we need to really unpack what those terms mean in everyday life, though.
Sure.
Let's start with the United States. So the U.S. is generally considered a low-context culture. What does that actually look like in the conversation?
Well, in a low-context culture, the meaning of a message is found directly inside the words themselves.
Okay.
It's explicit. People are expected to say exactly what they're thinking.
Right.
The primary goal of communication there is clarity and efficiency. So if an American is unhappy with a project, they'll usually just tell you, I'm unhappy with this.
Which, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense historically.
How so?
Well, the U.S. is a nation built by immigrants, right? From dozens of different countries.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So if you have a society where people don't share the same cultural background or the same religion or even the same first language, you really can't rely on unspoken assumptions.
That's a great point.
You have to be explicit or literally nothing gets done.
Exactly. Clarity became a survival mechanism.
Right.
Now, contrast that with the United Kingdom, which leans much, much more toward being a high-context culture.
Okay, so the opposite.
Right. In a high-context culture, the words are often the least important part of the message.
Wow.
Yeah. The true meaning is found around the words.
So you have to read the situation.
You do. You have to understand your relationship with the speaker, their tone of voice, the setting, and most importantly, you have to pay really close attention to what is deliberately left unsaid.
What's missing?
Exactly. And again, look at the history. The UK is an island nation. It has centuries of entrenched history and a very, very complex class system. People there have shared the same cultural references for generations. So because of that shared history, they just don't need to spell everything out.
I see. I like to think about it like reading a message on your phone.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, so low context is like reading a plain text message exactly as it's written. You just read the sentence and that is the entire message.
Right.
But high context is like trying to decode the true meaning, looking at the emojis, the punctuation, and even like the time of day the message was sent.
Oh, totally. Like getting a message at 2 a.m.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A simple word like, okay, with a period at the end can mean 100 different things depending on that context.
That's a perfect way to visualize it. In high context communication, a massive amount of the responsibility falls on the listener to decode the message.
Right.
But in low context communication, the responsibility is entirely on the speaker to make their message absolutely clear.
Okay, I want to pause here. I'd like the listener to think about this practically for just a moment.
Good idea.
Think about your own native language and the culture you live in. Do people in your daily life say exactly what they mean? Or do you constantly have to sort of read the room and guess the hidden meaning? I'm going to give you a couple of seconds. I want you to say it out loud. Just say, my culture is high context, or my culture is low context. Take a moment. Do you say it? Whether you lean high or low context, Just recognizing this difference is going to fundamentally change how you process spoken English.
Oh, absolutely.
And this brings us to a massive area of friction where these two styles constantly collide, which is politeness.
Yes. Politeness is such a tricky concept because, well, every culture believes they are polite.
Right. Nobody wakes up wanting to be rude.
Exactly. Nobody thinks, I'm going to be really offensive today. But how we actually demonstrate respect changes entirely depending on our cultural context. Linguists divide this into two main categories. They call them positive politeness and negative politeness.
See, I always find those labels slightly confusing because the word negative makes it sound like a bad thing.
Yeah, it does.
But in linguistics, it's not a value judgment at all, is it?
No, not at all. It had nothing to do with being optimistic or pessimistic.
Okay.
Let's look at the American style first, which is driven heavily by positive politeness.
Right.
Think of the word positive here as meaning addition. You are adding something to the interaction.
Okay, addition.
Yeah. Positive politeness emphasizes camaraderie, solidarity, and equality. It's really about making the other person feel liked and included in your group.
So it's very warm, very friendly, and because the ultimate goal is to establish equality, it actually allows people to be quite direct. Like if I say, hey, could you pass the salt? I'm treating you like a friend. The words are direct, but the warmth of the tone makes it polite.
Exactly. It assumes a baseline of friendship.
Right.
Now, the British style, however, is heavily influenced by negative politeness. And think of negative here as subtraction.
Subtraction. Okay.
Specifically, subtracting imposition or friction. Negative politeness is all about respecting the other person's personal space, their autonomy, and maintaining a respectful distance.
So you don't assume you're best friends.
Right. You definitely don't want to presume you are their close friend, and you certainly don't want to tell them what to do.
So if positive politeness is like a warm hug, negative politeness is more like a respectful bow from a few feet away.
Oh, that's a beautiful way to frame it. Yeah.
That's giving people room to breathe.
Exactly. So instead of making a direct request, British English relies heavily on tentative language, hesitation, and a really important technique called hedging.
Hedging. Let's explain that. Hedging is essentially using specific vocabulary to soften your statements so they don't land too aggressively.
Yes, exactly. A British person who is trying to achieve negative politeness might say something like, I'm afraid that's not quite right, or would you mind terribly if I borrowed this?
Oh, good.
So words like afraid, quite, and terribly, they act as shock absorbers.
Shock absorbers. I like that.
Yeah. They create distance. And remember, in a high context culture, distance equals respect.
But you can see immediately how this creates absolute chaos in international business.
Oh, constantly.
I hear stories all the time about multicultural teams missing important deadlines simply because they're essentially speaking two different emotional languages. Let's imagine a scenario to make this concrete. Say you're working on a big presentation and your British manager reviews your slide deck. They hand it back to you and they say, I have a few amends.
Right. This is a classic decoding failure.
Yeah.
So an American who is functioning in low context hears the phrase, a few amends, and processes it literally.
Because that's what the words mean.
Exactly. They think, great, there are just a few small typos, maybe a comma out of place. The core of my presentation is solid.
Right, because if the whole presentation was terrible, an American manager would probably just say, hey, this needs a major rewrite.
Yes. But the British manager is operating on negative politeness. They are actively trying to avoid imposing on your feelings or causing a direct, uncomfortable confrontation.
Right.
So when they say, I have a few amends, what they actually mean is, this is fundamentally flawed and it needs to be completely restructured.
Oh, wow.
But they've softened the blow so much that the American entirely misses the severity of the problem.
The American thinks they're getting a gentle polish.
Yeah.
And the British manager is quietly fuming because their polite, indirect command to rewrite the whole thing was completely ignored.
Exactly.
Here's another one that trips people up constantly. Let's say you pitch a new idea in a meeting and a British colleague says, well, that's an interesting idea.
Oh, yes. In the U.S., interesting is an active compliment.
Yeah, it means let's do it.
Right. It means your idea has merit, it's engaging, they want to explore it further. But in the UK, interesting is very often a polite shield.
A shield?
Yeah, it's a non-committal word used to avoid saying no directly. So if a British person says, that's an interesting idea, there's a very high probability they actually mean, this is completely unworkable and we're definitely not doing it.
It's just fascinating how a single word can mean its exact opposite, depending on the cultural software running in the background.
Absolutely.
What about social plans? Like, say you run into an old acquaintance at a coffee shop, and as they leave, they say, hey, let's do lunch soon.
Well, an American is very likely to pull out their phone and say, sure, I'm free next Thursday.
Right.
Because to them, an invitation was extended, and the logical next step is to schedule it. But for a British person, let's do lunch soon is more of a social lubricant.
It's just a phrase.
Exactly. It's a polite, pleasant way to signal the end of a conversation without any real intention of opening a calendar.
You know, I think some language learners feel a bit frustrated by this. They feel like high context communication is, I don't know, slightly dishonest.
I hear that a lot.
But it's really not lying, is it? It's a mutual ritual. Both British people in that interaction know they aren't actually going to lunch. The agreement is just about preserving a pleasant atmosphere.
That's spot on. It's about harmony.
Which leads to a really difficult area, giving negative feedback.
Oh, giving critique is where these cultural values are the most visible. American corporate culture is famous for something called the feedback sandwich.
Right to sandwich.
Because Americans value positive politeness, maintaining camaraderie and high energy, they structure bad news very carefully. They start with a genuine compliment, which is the top piece of bread.
Right.
Then they deliver the negative critique, the meat. And they finish with another encouraging compliment, the bottom piece of bread.
So it sounds something like you're bringing great energy to the team, but this financial report was poorly researched and late, but we really appreciate your dedication to the company.
Exactly. The feedback sandwich protects the person's ego.
And it ensures the working relationship remains optimistic.
Right. The British method, conversely, often avoids the direct negative critique altogether just to preserve social harmony.
So how do they say it?
Well, a British manager might just say, perhaps we could look at the timing of these reports.
Wow.
Leaving the employee to completely decode the fact that they are in serious trouble for missing deadlines.
Okay, I want to give the listener a chance to practice this decoding skill really quickly. I'm going to ask a question. I want you to answer out loud.
Okay.
If a British colleague says to you, your idea is quite interesting, are they likely feeling positive or negative about your idea? Take a second and say it out loud. Okay, did you answer?
Yeah.
If you said negative, you're on the right track. You're starting to hear what's happening beneath the surface of the words.
And understanding that underlying meaning really requires mastering a specific set of advanced vocabulary.
Yes, it does.
If someone is studying B2 or C1 English, they absolutely need to understand the mechanics of understatement.
Understatement feels like the defining characteristic of British English to me.
It's certainly one of the most prominent ones. Understatement is the practice of deliberately describing a situation as less important, less extreme, or less serious than it actually is.
Right.
It's a way of minimizing intense emotion, which ties directly back to our concept of negative politeness, avoiding imposition.
So how do we do it linguistically?
You use gradable adverbs, words like rather, quite, and terribly. They cool down the emotional temperature of a sentence.
Okay, so if a British person is furious about something, they won't typically say, I'm absolutely infuriated.
Yeah.
Because that's too much raw emotion, right? It's too imposing.
Exactly. They'll say, I am rather annoyed.
Rather annoyed. Or if there's torrential rain and flooding outside, they won't say, it's a catastrophic storm. They'll say, it's a bit damp.
Right. Or a bit breezy if there's a hurricane. A really common everyday example is the phrase not bad.
Oh, yeah.
In the US, if you ask how a meal was and someone says, oh, it was not bad, they usually mean it was actually quite good. They're pleasantly surprised.
Right.
But in the UK, not bad often means it's just mediocre.
Really?
Yeah. It's not the worst thing they've eaten, but it's certainly not great. By focusing on the absence of badness, they avoid having to declare strong feelings either way.
Okay, but I want to pause here. Because English isn't just a language of quiet minimization.
No, definitely not.
I hear native speakers exaggerate all the time. People say things like, my suitcase weighs a ton, or I have a million emails to answer.
That is a great observation. What you're describing is the linguistic opposite of understatement. It's called hyperbole.
Hyperbole.
Yeah, hyperbole is intentional exaggeration. It's used to create a strong emotional impact or a really vivid mental image. It is never meant to be taken literally.
Because obviously nobody's inbox literally contains a million unread emails.
Right.
Well, I hope not. So why do we use both? If understatement is about hiding emotion and being polite, why do we certainly use hyperbole to blast emotion everywhere?
It really comes down to the speaker's intent in that specific moment. You use understatement when your goal is to manage a relationship, avoid conflict, or maintain decorum.
Okay.
But you use hyperbole when your goal is to entertain, to emphasize a narrative point, or just to vent frustration in a way that feels dramatic but safe.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Saying, I've been waiting for this train for 1,000,000 years
Yeah.
feels so much better than saying, I've been waiting for 20 minutes.
Exactly.
It validates your internal frustration by making it epic.
Yes. And what's really interesting here is that the balance between understatement and hyperbole is actually shifting globally right now.
Is it?
Yeah. Linguistic research looking at spoken English, film dialogue, and television over the last 60 years shows a measurable drop in traditional polite vocabulary.
Wow.
The use of words like please, quite, and perhaps is slowly declining.
So wait, are you saying the English language is just becoming ruder,
Not ruder, just differently polite.
differently polite?
Yes. We're seeing a global shift toward the American style of positive politeness. Because of social media, remote work, and just the sheer dominance of American pop culture, casual camaraderie is becoming the global standard. People are using thanks instead of thank you, or they're starting professional emails with hi instead of dear. The strict, formal, negative politeness of the mid-20th century is gradually softening.
Honestly, that's a huge relief for a lot of language learners.
I'm sure it is.
Before we transition to the next topic, let's practice the pronunciation of that exaggeration word because the spelling tricks a lot of people.
Oh, it does.
It looks like it should be pronounced hyperbole, but it's not. I'll say it, and I want the listener to repeat it after me. Ready? Hyperbole. Take a second. Great. So we've talked about how cultures manage politeness and how they use understatement to hide strong emotions.
Mm-hmm.
If you take those two concepts and mix them together, you get my absolute favorite topic, humor.
Humor is arguably the most accurate cultural lens we have.
It really is.
A society's jokes reveal what they value, what they fear, and what makes them deeply uncomfortable. And British humor is globally recognized for being highly distinct from American humor.
Very distinct.
We can basically break British humor down into 4 foundational pillars.
Let's walk through those. The first one connects directly to high context communication, right?
Yes, the first pillar is subtlety. Because they are a high context culture, the joke is very often found in the silence.
In the silence.
It's in what the comedian refuses to say. You'll see a lot of deadpan delivery where the speaker delivers a ridiculous line with an entirely blank, serious facial expression.
No smiling.
Exactly. The humor isn't spoon-fed to the audience. The audience actually has to work a little bit to find it in those awkward pauses.
And the second pillar is absurdity.
Yes.
This is something that really defines British comedy for me. But why is absurdity so popular there?
Well, think about the psychological reality of living in a society governed by negative politeness. If you are constantly monitoring your behavior to ensure you aren't imposing on anyone, you build up a lot of psychological tension.
That makes sense.
Absurdity taking bizarre, surreal, completely illogical situations and treating them as perfectly normal, it acts as a pressure release valve.
Oh, wow.
It's a safe way to break the rigid rules of society because the scenario is simply too ridiculous to be offensive.
That's a really compelling way to look at it. The rigidity of the culture creates the need for the surrealism in the comedy.
Exactly.
So what's the third pillar?
The third pillar is wordplay. English has a massive vocabulary, and British humor relies heavily on puns, double meanings, and clever verbal irony.
Which again requires high context understanding.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And the fourth pillar is arguably the most crucial one,
Which is
self-deprecation.
making yourself the target of the joke.
Precisely. In British culture, displaying unearned confidence or arrogance is a major social misstep.
It breaks the rule of equality.
It breaks the rule of equality and non-imposition. Therefore, the safest and most endearing target for any joke is yourself.
Right.
Highlighting your own flaws, your own awkwardness, or your own failures shows humility. It makes you approachable.
So how does this contrast with the American comedic tradition? Because they feel very different.
The differences are stark, and it starts with the physical delivery. American humor historically has a deep love for physical comedy or slapstick.
Slapstick, yeah.
It involves big, exaggerated movements, highly expressive faces, and physical gags.
Which is brilliant because physical comedy is low context. You don't need a high-level vocabulary to understand why someone slipping and falling is funny. It translates universally.
It's immediate and accessible to everyone.
Right.
British humor, relying heavily on understatement and verbal irony, doesn't translate as easily because it is deeply dependent dependent on the nuances of the language.
There's also a fundamental difference in the worldview of the jokes, I think.
How do you mean?
Well, American humor often revolves around confidence or success or the hyperbolic exaggeration of a grand achievement. Comedians will tell stories where they are the cleverest person in the room, even if it's an obvious exaggeration.
Yes, whereas UK jokes revolve around the inevitability of failure.
Right.
The British cultural mindset is very comfortable with losing. Their humor often centers on how terrible they are at basic tasks or how mundane and disappointing daily life is.
Think about how the two cultures would handle an everyday annoyance. Like, imagine a train breaks down on the way to work.
Okay.
The American comedic response is often rooted in an optimistic, can-do frustration. They'll loudly demand a solution, maybe joke about how they're going to hike the rest of the way and build a new city.
Yeah.
But the British comedic response is just a deep, weary sigh. They'll look out the window and say, well, of course it's broken. It's a Tuesday. I didn't want to go to work anyway.
That is perfectly stated. The humor is in accepting the defeat. And that perfectly illustrates the gap between American optimism and British realism or pessimism, depending on how you view it.
Right.
And this cultural gap also dictates the kind of slang you'll hear in entertainment.
Slang is incredibly challenging for B2 and C1 learners because it isn't in standard textbooks.
No, it's not. American comedians tend to use modern pop culture-driven slang that spreads rapidly via social media.
Like what?
Words like ghosted, binge watching, or acronyms like FOMO, the fear of missing out.
Right, very online vocabulary.
Very contemporary, very global. British comedians, however, heavily rely on traditional regional slang that has existed for decades. Words like knackered for being exhausted, chuffed for being delighted, or the phrase taking the mickey, which means mocking someone.
And because British slang is so tied to specific regions and long-standing class cultures, it's a much higher barrier for a non-native speaker to cross.
Definitely.
Let's do a quick recall exercise for the listener. We discussed a really important C1 level concept regarding British humor just a moment ago.
Yes, we did.
Do you remember the specific term for making fun of yourself to show humility? It starts with the word self. I'll give you a second to say it out loud. Did you get it? Self-deprecation. Using that concept naturally will instantly make your English sound more culturally fluent.
It really will. And these linguistic traits we're talking about, the understatement, the self-deprecation, the negative politeness, they aren't just isolated to stand-up comedy or office emails.
Where else do we see them?
They scale up, they shape public media, marketing, and really the entire national identity.
Let's explore that scale a bit. How do these cultural quirks show up in everyday public life? Take advertising, for example. I imagine American ads are very different from British ones.
Advertising is a fascinating mirror for a society's psychology.
Okay.
If you look at American marketing, it is relentlessly optimistic. The tone is aspirational.
Right. Buy this and be happy.
Yes. You'll see bright colors, people cheering, achieving their goals, and the implicit message is always, buy our product and you will become a winner.
It's positive politeness weaponized into sales.
Exactly. Now, what about British advertising?
Well, British audiences are generally highly suspicious of unearned confidence, right?
Yes, they are.
So if a brand comes out and says, we are the greatest company in the world, the British consumer instinct is to roll their eyes and distrust them.
Totally.
So British ads frequently employ heavy self-deprecation. They might openly mock their own product, highlight a minor flaw, or show characters failing miserably while using it.
Yes.
The underlying message is, we know life is difficult, and we don't take ourselves too seriously, so you can trust us.
It's brilliant marketing. They're using vulnerability to build trust.
But if you ran an ad in the US saying, our product is just okay and we're a bit of a mess, it would completely fail.
Oh, completely. The American consumer would just buy from the competitor who claims to be the best.
Right. The cultural software determines what message is actually persuasive.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another area that heavily impacts advanced English learners, which is reading the news.
Oh, yes.
For anyone preparing for a C1 reading comprehension exam, British newspapers can be incredibly disorienting.
Because they don't follow the standard rules of journalistic neutrality.
They don't. British newspapers, especially the tabloids, but even broadsheets, they use heavy sarcasm and irony, even when reporting on major political or economic crises.
It's true.
They regularly blend serious news with that pillar of absurdity we discussed earlier.
I actually remember a perfect example of this. There was a viral video a few years ago of a prominent British politician dancing really awkwardly at a serious international summit.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, and the next morning, a major political newspaper ran a massive front-page headline calling the politician a dancing queen, referencing the pop song.
Wow.
They used a deeply absurd, sarcastic joke to make a highly serious critique about the politician's lack of leadership on the global stage.
Right. The American press usually keeps a strict firewall between serious hard news and humorous editorial commentary. But the British press actively mixes them. You also see the media actively inventing modern slang that immediately enters the standard vocabulary.
Oh, definitely.
The UK media popularized terms like Brexiteers for people advocating to leave the European Union and Remainers for those who wanted to stay.
Right.
These media-created portmanteaus became official dictionary words almost overnight.
There's another layer to British media that I think learners need to be aware of, and it goes back to that idea of high context.
What's that?
The use of language to signal social class.
Oh, yes. Class consciousness is woven deeply into British English.
Explain how that works in the news.
Well, a newspaper might use highly formal grammar, obscure vocabulary, or drop a reference to a 16th century Shakespeare play while explaining a modern tax policy.
Right.
They aren't doing this just to be informative, they're doing it to signal to a specific, highly educated demographic.
I see.
It's a linguistic way of creating an in-group who gets the reference and an out-group who doesn't.
It's high-context communication operating on a national scale. You need to know the history, the literature, and the class structures just to fully decode the morning news.
Exactly. And there is one media trend that I find absolutely fascinating, which ties everything we've talked about today together.
Okay, what is it?
Media research into conflict reporting shows a massive divergence between the US and the UK.
Conflict reporting, meaning how they cover arguments and politics.
Yes. The British media focuses roughly 80% of its conflict reporting on foreign policy and international issues.
Oh, 80%.
80%. Only about 20% of their conflict coverage is focused on domestic, internal UK issues.
That is a staggering ratio.
Yeah.
80% looking outward. What does the U.S. ratio look like?
The U.S. media is much more domestically focused. It usually hovers around 60% domestic conflict and 40% foreign, though it fluctuates.
Right.
The American press is obsessed with internal political battles.
So why does the British media dedicate 80% of its energy to looking at the outside world?
Well, sociologists and media analysts suggest that this external focus is actually a macro-level version of negative politeness.
Wait, really? How does that work? Negative politeness on a national scale?
Think about the core of negative politeness. It's avoiding awkwardness, avoiding direct confrontation, and maintaining social harmony in a crowded society.
Right, giving people space.
If a country spends all its time aggressively debating its own domestic failures, its healthcare system, its local politics, its class inequalities, it creates massive internal friction.
Yeah, people get angry at each other.
Exactly. By focusing 80% of their critical energy on conflicts thousands of miles away, the society politely avoids the extreme discomfort of confronting their own domestic issues directly.
That is a phenomenal insight. It's like a whole nation using international news to politely look away from an awkward conversation at home.
Yes.
It protects the domestic social fabric by projecting the conflict outward. It's like staring out the window when someone is arguing in the living room with you.
That's exactly it. It's a structural manifestation of the same instinct that makes a British person say, I have a few amends, instead of, this is terrible.
Avoid the direct conflict. Maintain the decorum.
Exactly.
That really brings everything full circle. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, and I want to make sure we summarize these concepts so they're genuinely practical for your daily English use.
Let's do it. We started by looking at high versus low context.
Right.
In a low context culture like the US, trust the words. In a high context culture like the UK, you have to decode the meaning hiding in the tone, the situation, and the silence.
Then we broke down positive versus negative politeness.
Yes.
The American style uses positive politeness, warmth, and directness to show friendship. The British style uses negative politeness, hedging, and respectful distance to avoid imposing on you.
We also examine the vocabulary of understatement, using words like quite and rather to cool down negative emotions, and we contrasted it with the American tendency toward hyperbole, exaggerating to tell a more impactful story.
And finally, we explored how those traits build the four pillars of British humor, subtlety, absurdity, wordplay, and self-deprecation, and how that instinct to avoid direct conflict, scales all the way up to how a nation reports its own news.
Which leaves us with a really compelling question about the future.
What's that?
Well, as we noted, the English language is currently shifting. With the absolute dominance of the internet, global streaming algorithms, and remote international workforces, English is rapidly solidifying as a global utility rather than just a regional language.
It really is. It's the operating system of the digital world.
Precisely. So the question we have to ask is, will these subtle, highly nuanced cultural differences between the US and the UK eventually flatten out?
Oh, wow.
As millions of people from different backgrounds communicate in the exact same digital spaces, are we inevitably moving toward one single, highly direct, low-context global English?
That is a fascinating thought.
Will the British eventually be forced to abandon understatement entirely just to ensure they're accurately understood on a multinational video call?
It makes you wonder if the pursuit of perfect efficiency will eventually erase the cultural charm of the language.
It's definitely possible.
I suppose we'll have to watch how it evolves over the next decade. But until then, you now have the tools to decode both worlds.
Yes, you do.
And that brings us to your call to action for today. Learning isn't passive, so we really want you to practice this actively. Sometime today, for just 10 minutes, consume some English media. Watch a TV show, read a work email, or even just listen to an interview.
Just pay attention.
Yes, and ask yourself, are they communicating in low context or high context? Are they being direct, or are they hiding the true meaning around the words?
It's a great exercise.
Keep analyzing the language like this, and your advanced English will sound more natural and intuitive every single day. Thanks for joining us for our discussion today.